The US Embassy in South Africa has issued a terror alert, saying it has information pointing to a possible terror attack in either Johannesburg or Cape Town. The embassy is sticking to its guns, despite criticism from the South African presidency. Now, over the past few days, the US, Britain and Australia have issued travel advisories urging their citizens to avoid tourist hotspots in South Africa. However, the International Relations Department is saying it's unhappy with the manner in which the information is being handled. The department says the information is dubious, as it was provided by a walk-in source. It's also accusing some countries of trying to manipulate and control South Africa's counter-terrorism efforts. Well, despite the political wrangling around the actual terror alert, the question is, should South Africans be concerned based on the high terror alert globally? And is South Africa immune from terror attacks? Well, to discuss, I have with me Kerwin Lebone of the Institute of Race Relations. What a pleasure to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Bashana.
What do you make of the terror alerts coming through from the US?
The US, as one of the superpowers in the world, they never issue terror alerts lightly. In fact, the only time they made a mistake was in 2013 in Kenya, where they said they had information prior to the attacks, but they didn't want to issue it. So I'm sure they've learned from that. And as from now on, I think the Americans would rather err on the side of vigilance rather than complacency.
It does seem ludicrous for the average South African not to be concerned about this terror alert. So what do you make of the Department of International Relations response, the response coming through from the presidency, the response coming through from the Ministry of Security? Certainly the US is not going to make a willy-nilly terror alert just for the sake of it.
Absolutely. And as we know now, the Americans consulted our government before issuing the alert, which makes it seem like there is a breakdown in communication between the Department of International Relations and the presidency and the government. Minister Hadebe said that they have very cordial relations with the Americans in terms of security measures, among other things. And the presidency as well has also affirmed those cordial relations. So it does seem that the statement by Department of International Relations was made without being aware of the consultations that the Americans had with the government.
So they're not talking to each other?
Absolutely. There seems to be a breakdown in communication in that regard.
And no clarification coming through from either of them yet. We know the US is sticking to its guns.
The US is sticking to its guns, and the department, in fact, Minister Hadebe was asked today in the press conference about this issue. And when she said he affirmed the cordial relations between us, South Africa and the Americans, he was specifically asked, does that mean that you are distancing yourself from the statement issued, the demarche issued by Department of International Relations? And the only thing he could say was that that's where I stand.
Kerwin, the International Relations Department has come out saying that this terror alert is some kind of attempt to manipulate South Africa's counter-terrorism strategy. How do they justify this? What do you understand about this?
Well, after the statements from the presidency and the cabinet, those statements do not seem to carry as much weight. And I think if the Americans were worried before about statements from the Department of International Relations, they should be reassured by President and the cabinet that, they are working together, they have a cordial relationship, and nothing is out of place in terms of the issuing of the alert. As I said earlier, there was consultation with the government on the part of the Americans. Everyone seems to have known what was going to be said by the Americans, except the department, of course.
From the presidency's side, are they justified in not wanting to cause unnecessary panic amongst South Africans? What kind of additional information do you think they require before they can actually act on this warning, substantially act on it?
That's the problem about intelligence. The man on the street can never really be fully in the know about the requirements and what information that the Americans received. But as we are not immune from terror attacks, I think it is much better for citizens to be made aware of the threats and err on the side of vigilance and caution rather than be complacent, because the reason that the fact that we have never had a major terror incident in the past doesn't mean that we cannot have it. We'll remember in the past we had a bombing of Planet Hollywood in Cape Town. Although people might consider it a minor incident, such things can happen again. It was a targeting of a Western business in South Africa. It can still happen. So I think what the Americans and the South African government agreed to in terms of issuing of the terror alert is a good thing to make South African citizens aware of the threats.
But awareness is one thing. We know there was a statement issued saying, it was reported rather in the media, that the malls have stepped up security. What kind of security is needed to prevent a terror attack inside a mall?
If you go to average South African mall, you'll know that security just walks around and never checks people. I think there should be a thorough check at one entrance point of people to ensure that they are not carrying dangerous weapons or devices that they can use for terror attacks.
And that's all that's required, really.
Otherwise, you'll be infringing on the rights of shoppers, and you'll certainly send away a lot of shoppers if you go over that. But just an awareness around the area and ensuring that everyone who walks into the mall has got no dangerous weapons on them should be sufficient.
The IRR issued a statement saying very explicitly that South Africa is not immune from terror attacks, which is why I brought you into studio. Tell us more about some of the research that points out to the fact that South Africa is not immune to terror attacks.
Firstly, terrorism is a global threat, and the traditional targets of terror have strengthened their security measures. Airports in America and so on. The Kenyans, I'm sure, have stepped up their security measures as well. The Nigerians are trying to stem the threats coming from Boko Haram. And so in this environment, terrorists will always look for softer, easier targets, and no one better than South Africa in that regard. Because firstly, give you an example with the 2013 Westgate mall attacks in Kenya. One of the masterminds, a lady from Britain, was said to be in possession of a South African a traveling document. Our Home Affairs, we know that there's been a problem of corruption. I know the minister now is trying to sort it out, but our documents are easily available for people. And we have a problem with porous borders that the presidency has been trying to solve since the president, since he came into power in 2009, has tried to establish an agency. We have tried to bring back border patrols. We certainly have a huge problem with the 800 kilometers of unmanned border area between us and Mozambique, which is where a lot of problems in terms of human trafficking and illegal arms trade are coming through. So we already have a problem with lax security on the part of South Africans in terms of documentation and our borders, which is what would make us a desirable destination to make statements against the Western interest in the country.
Are these challenges being addressed?
With the agency, they have, for one thing, to their credit, the South African government and the Department of Defense have brought back about 5,000 more personnel to patrol our borders and to try and also improve the infrastructure because some of the electrical fences were not working. And Home Affairs is trying to make sure that the identity documents that they issue now are more safe and cannot be easily forged. So there are attempts, to be sure, in terms of trying to strengthen such security measures in the country.
Coming back to this terror attack, this terror alert, rather, South Africa has to protect its tourism interest as well. The US, Britain and Australia are trying to protect the interests of their citizens that are traveling to South Africa. We know that the economy is being challenged right now. The major sectors are in contraction. Are their responses adequate to reassure foreign visitors coming to South Africa?
I'm sure that after the department, people would have been worried if only the Department of International Relations had issued the statement and there was no further response from our government. But the statements from the President and the Cabinet have gone a long way in reassuring people that we are working with affected countries in trying to stem this. And as long as people can be reassured that something is being done about it, that we are not sitting back and taking things lightly, it won't affect our tourism. It has never been, our tourism, a very resilient sector, has never been affected by the high crime levels we have in the country. But as I said, a firm statement from our government, from the presidency and the cabinet to say that we are working with the Americans in case there's any threat would go a long way into reassuring our visitors to our shores that the government is taking things seriously and are willing to take a step further in trying to ensure the safety of visitors.
Kerwin, thank you so much for your insightful feedback on this subject.
You're welcome, Moshina.